Snow on the longest day of the year? Really? I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 22nd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Comments, questions, always welcome. Write them up down below. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Clay Goose, B. Nadine, Our Predicament, E. Slate, Evolution Moto. These are longtime contributors, and I really appreciate their contributions. With that, let's get to work. We'll start by taking a quick look at significant wave heights around the planet. Starting in the North Pacific, really nothing going on. South Pacific, a small gale with 6-foot seas is falling south. Probably not doing a whole lot, at least at the moment. And then scattered bits of 20-foot seas across the entirety of the South Pacific, but nothing of any particular interest. North Atlantic, things pretty quiet. South Atlantic, a gale, 26-foot seas, targeting South Africa pretty well, so swell likely bound in for there. And then over in the Indian Ocean, other scattered areas of 26, 25-foot and 23-foot seas over a broad area, likely generating swell pushing off to the north. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at current conditions. We're going to start up in the Pacific Northwest off the Columbia River, Grays Harbor buoy number 036. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting this buoy all the way up from 33.3 second period. That'd be super energetic swell, which there is none, all the way down to 5-second period, that's just like pure wind chop. What we see is a little bump here in the 15 to 16 second range, another bump in about the 8-second range. The algorithm will help tease out what actual swell values are. Primary swell, 4.1 feet at 8.2 seconds from 292 degrees. That's about waist-high surf, 3 foot. And then this southern hemiswell, 1 foot at 15.6 seconds from 227 degrees, and that comes out to about 1.5 foot surf at your standard beach break without any swell-enhancing bathymetry reefs or whatever. Down to Northern California, just north of Ocean Beach, Point Reyes buoy number 029. Same sort of deal, little tiny bits of energy, likely southern hemi energy, and then a bunch of wind swell here in about the 7-second period range. Primary swell, 5.8 feet, 7.8 seconds from 310 degrees. That would make surf at about chest high. And then the secondary swell, 0.9 of a foot from 15 seconds from 206 degrees. And that would make surf at about 1.5 feet. Then down to Southern California, the Point Loma South buoy 191 off of San Diego. A little bit of southern hemiswell, it looks like, from 14 seconds, then a little bit of wind swell mixed in. Primary swell, well, the wind swell actually takes over, 3.4 feet at 9.4 seconds from 282 degrees. That would make waist-high surf. And then the southern hemiswell, 2 feet at 13.9 seconds from 210 degrees. And again, making surf at about waist-high. And then finally, over to the south shore of the Hawaiian Islands, the Lanai buoy, the most protected of all of them here. You see southern hemi swell and a little bit of wind swell mixed in, but nothing particularly big. Primary swell, 1.4 feet at 13.2 seconds from 185 degrees. Call it 2-foot surf, a little bit over knee-high maybe, thigh-high maybe, with luck. And then wind swell, 1.2 feet at 10 seconds from the southeast and about knee-high. So all in all, a pretty quiet swell pattern is in play for our main forecast area, which is California and Hawaii. All right, let's go take a look and see what's been going on over the past week in various oceans around the planet. We're going to start in the North Pacific. We are back to last week's video, 18Z on Sunday, the 15th of June. We'll just put this into motion. We're looking for anything with seas 20 feet or higher. Now, seeing how it is almost the end of June, there's really no expectation that that's going to happen. And here we are, the current model run, no swell production in the North Pacific has occurred. Then we head to the South Pacific. Same deal. We're looking for anything that might have happened. And here we have a gale that developed south of New Zealand on Monday night, the 16th of June, built with seas 35.6 feet. Right there, that's the highest seas over this entire domain. And you can see it pretty there. But then here is the ice anomaly. The Great Circle Path heading up to California and Hawaii, though, pushes north of the ice anomaly. So I think some swell will resort. You actually see the fetch itself push just barely north of, I mean, it's not an anomaly. It is literally chunks of ice flowing off the Ross Ice Shelf. Now, Jake Marlowe made a comment. He's one of our followers, said, it'd be really funny if this ice anomaly has been there for decades and eons prior, but it was only now that we were able to see it because of new technology incorporated in the GFS wave model. And I think that is exactly spot on. That is what has happened. There has always been some degree of ice breaking up and freezing and doing stuff off the Ross Ice Shelf because it is winter down there. Not unexpected, but the model, and well, it really is satellite-based data that picks up the ice and then they incorporate it into the wave model. The ECMWF wave model does not have that technology, so it doesn't see it. But I think this is probably a better representation of reality than anything else out there at the moment. Anyway, all right, so Tuesday morning, the 17th of June, we still had 35.3 foot seas, and then, of course, the fetch moved over the ice anomaly. It couldn't generate any more swell, and that was the end of that. Now, another gale developed on Wednesday, just north of there. You see 27.7 foot seas, and 27.7 foot again on Wednesday morning, and again 27 feet. So some swell is bound for that. Now, notice all this fetch aimed due north. So this one's probably targeting Hawaii well, where the previous one down here is probably targeting the U.S. West Coast better, and in Central America and Mexico in that area. But this is probably more than likely going to be a Tahiti. Where's Tahiti? Like right there, almost. Yeah, I think there's some decent fetch aimed at Tahiti, but, Hawaii right square in the crosshairs, whereas this thing probably will do nothing for the U.S. West Coast. So, going to be interesting to see how this all plays out over the coming week. Anyway, put this back into motion. Thursday, nothing happened. Friday, a little bit of something down here relative to southern Chile. Seas were 36 feet. And let's see, and then it pretty much moved out of the window. And here we are, current time, not a whole lot going on. To the North Atlantic, we'll put this into motion now. Notice, again, low pressure coming here, not so great. But that speaks to part of this other pattern. We're going to get into that in a minute, the snow thing that happened. Anyway, low pressure still circulating. What was that? We had, what were the seas right about there? 19 feet, and this was on Wednesday. So this still speaks to the jet stream and the northern hemisphere jet stream being fairly strong and being productive. There we are, current time. Nothing else after that. Down to the South Atlantic, we'll just put this into motion. Again, we're looking over the past week. Stormy weather here on Wednesday, the 18th of June, with 29 foot, almost 30 foot seas south of the southern tip. There we go, and up to 30 foot. Another area of 32 foot seas developed, pushing south of, that'd be west of South Africa on Friday, very close to the coast. And then here we are Saturday, another system developing in the exact same place into Sunday with 26 foot seas. So a continued, I'd call it more like a local gale pattern for the southern tip of South Africa. And that's been the sort of the pattern of late, and it seems to be continuing. Then finally, the Indian Ocean, looking over the past week, starting June 15th. Little gale, 33 or so foot seas, but it pretty much petered out. Another one in the deep South Ocean with about 34 foot seas. It faded out. You can see, though, a swell front started impacting Perth and Western Australia on late Thursday into Friday, bound for Bali and Indonesia area. And then where are we? We're Saturday going into Sunday current time. Looks like more developing behind that. So what is to come? We're going to start, and we're focusing now on the South Pacific. We're going to start by looking at Jetstream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a pushing the jet to the north. You see it right there, kind of, and right there. And what that helps do is create a clockwise flow aloft in the upper atmosphere. That also manifests itself down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure, a clockwise circulation in the southern hemisphere. Of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Those winds get traction on the ocean surface, impart energy to the ocean, creating seas. Those seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, the lesser period elements of those seas fade away, exposing longer period swell. And of course, swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. It all starts with a trough then. So we're looking for a significant trough. Now, here we go. We see, what is that, 120 knot winds? That's New Zealand right there. So there's a decent trough forecast this evening. Notice east of there, a ridge pushing south. All that's going to do is create high pressure, does nothing for storm production. So really there you go. That's a pretty decently defined trough on Monday into Tuesday, into Wednesday. Pretty pinched though, pushing its way across the Pacific. And then on Thursday, still almost cut off, but you see north winds, south winds, all some sort of a circulation likely there. And then that all starts, well, it looks like it's fading out, but that even still looks like it could support gale development into Friday and Saturday. And then finally the winds get really weak on, we're into Sunday. And now here we are a week from now. The two branches of the jet stream reasonably well merged, but just pretty weak, suggesting not a lot of energy in the jet, maybe not great support for gale development. Let's go take a look down at the surface. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds, New Zealand here. Some sort of a tropical low and a cold core low here. Both of them trying to merge, and there's a developing trough in this area as we get later in the day. Today's Sunday, but notice all the winds here aim due south at Antarctica, not really off to the northeast, where we'd want. The core motion still falling south. I mean, there is south winds here as we get into Monday about mid-morning, 45 knots. The ice line somewhere down around here. Let's see what happened. Look at that. It collapses, all falls south. Not looking great for storm production, or at least swell production. But then some remnant little piece of that tries to organize on Wednesday. Tiny area, 45 knot winds, building but sort of falling south. Continuing up to 50 knot winds on Thursday. Now this looks much better than what I saw earlier. Continuing into almost Friday, then fading out. We know the trough is supposed to fade out. And then here we are into Sunday and nothing after that. All right, so we can have all the perfect jet stream we want. We can have all the winds we want, but those winds have to get traction on the ocean surface, and they have to be pushing up towards our fetch area, so up to the northeast. Here's the current situation. Seas from the tropical low, that other little low. Nothing particularly impressive. Notice the motion. That looks like good seas, 33 feet, but they're all aimed south at the ice anomaly. Maybe it'll help break it up. You see the whole motion generally pushing south. That does nothing for us. Great 37-foot seas, but all just blasting right into the ice field there. Now notice the model does not show or project the anticipated impact of winds and seas into the ice field. So we're hoping maybe this will help break things up a little bit. Anyway, we get into Wednesday. We know there's supposed to be another little fetch. There it tries to go with 26-foot seas, 28-foot seas, 30, that looks like about 31-foot seas, lifting north. Really not very impressive. Small in coverage. Not sure any meaningful swell will even come from that. So all said and done, and here we are, we're Saturday. I'm just trying to get us out to Sunday here. There's, we can go 2 more frames. Here we are, really, over this entire week, no obvious support for swell production is anticipated, or at best, very minor aimed up towards Mexico and the U.S. West Coast, but nothing significant. So let's go take a look around the rest of the ocean, see what the forecast is. Now, here we are in the North Pacific. I mean, you can kind of guess how this is going to turn out. Notice, though, there still is some movement for late June. Not unusual, but tropical system here off the Philippines. Notice that but that's almost a week out now. So basically, North Pacific asleep, as one would expect for this time of year. To the North Atlantic, we'll put this into motion, see if there is, in fact, any more activity forecast. Well, look at that. I mean, you can clearly see what are those seas? They're in the, 12 to, I'll be generous and say 14-foot range, something like that. So wind swell, so for sure for Ireland, the UK area, but getting steadily less prevalent as compared to weeks past. But still, given the fact that it's almost the end of June, that there's this much going on is kind of amazing. Then down to the South Atlantic, where you'd expect all the action to really be going. Now, we do have a gale here south of Africa, 28-foot seas. There you go, barely 30 feet. These blues, you can see right here, 30 feet, or I guess that's actually a shade of purple. So now a stronger one with 38-foot seas forecast late Monday into Tuesday, lifting pretty well to the north. I mean, that would scour the whole coast of Africa here with swell, the west coast of Africa, bypassing the southeast Africa, and literally plowing right into the coast there. Maybe a big wave event for the Cape Town area if this happens, though pretty raw it looks like. Then we continue on into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the 28th. Here goes another system consistent with more like what we've been seeing this year, pushing up the southeast coast of South Africa with 28, 29-foot seas. And then here we are at the end of the model run. Nothing else behind that. And then the Indian Ocean. All right, current time, Sunday, 12Z, June 22nd. Gale building, 30-foot seas aimed well off to the north. Another gale under, I'll call it southwest Australia with 26-foot seas, literally impacting the coast. Seas building here to 35 feet. This is definitely going to generate swell, targeting Mentawais, Indonesia, Bali area into Western Australia. That system holds together good while tracking off to the east, 33-foot seas on Tuesday, fading out. Another one builds right behind it. Oh, look at that. It actually regroups as it falls south. That will probably result in swell for Tasmania and exposed breaks here off the, southeastern or southern Australia, I guess you'd call it. Moving on, looking for any other sign of hope. Another little gale, not pushing well to the north, more off to the east with 35-foot seas. And this is on Sunday, almost a week out. Never believe a model out that far, but at least it's some hope for that area. I mean, the real focus of energy, if I were going to pick anything on the planet, has been from right along here, just south of South Africa, into sort of this area. And that is no big surprise. The low pressure bias, we think that is the El Nino-ish, whatever you want to call it, indicator is sitting right over this area. So one would think this would be the most productive area on the planet. All right, wind forecast for California, Hawaii. Hawaii is out here. California's here. There's the Baja, Southern California border. So San Diego right there, that's Southern California. Central California from Point Conception there up to about San Francisco Ocean Beach. Then Northern California from Point Reyes here on north up to the border with Oregon. We've been, and I'm just going to click this through because this is past history to about right there. You notice high pressure in control of the Gulf of Alaska, pushing up against the California coast, tightening up the isobars there, creating a pressure gradient, creating steady northwest winds. I mean, it's been blowing nonstop for 2 weeks now, pretty much all spring. Spring is still occurring even now as we're into the 22nd of June. I mean, my standard joke is summer doesn't start till the 4th of July, at least in Northern California. That seems to be holding true. Water temperatures have been dropping pretty dramatically. Point Reyes Buoy, which is right out here, was like, I think it was 49 or 50 degrees this morning, just because of nuking northwest winds that create upwelling that, drop cold water from deep in the ocean. Good news is, once the winds calm down and the sun starts beating on the ocean surface, it warms up reasonably quickly. All right, so we're into Sunday night. The gradient's still in control. Into Monday morning, look at this. It instantly starts vaporizing. Winds northwest, only 10 knots for Central California Monday morning. Trade's still blowing pretty solid, 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Tuesday, gradient completely gone for Central California and pretty much for Northern California. Trade's 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Wednesday, same sort of deal. Tries to come back a little bit, 15-knot winds. Trade's lightening up for the Hawaiian Islands, 10 to 15 knots. So we get into Thursday, high pressure trying to get nosing into the coast a little. Here we go again, 20 to almost 25-knot north winds Thursday. Let's see if it builds anymore. And Friday, same sort of deal. Still a pressure gradient. Trade's pretty light for the Hawaiian Islands, 10 to 15 knots. Friday, Saturday, the gradient at least doesn't reach south of Point Conception, but still on Saturday, 20-knot northwest winds. Trade's 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. We can get here till Sunday morning. Gradient rebuilds, but now this is more of a normal position where it's from Point Arena here northward with 20 to 25-knot northwest winds. That for this time of year, that would be more standard, typically what you would expect. Hikers temperature forecast. Now, this is a little bit old. It's from Friday, but you get the general idea. Here is, notice the cold air. It says 35. This is at the intersection of the Pacific Crest Trail and Tioga Pass Road in Yosemite. That's the high road that goes across the Sierra over to the east side of the Sierra. Pacific Crest Trail runs north and south from Mexico up to Canada. Where they intersect on Tioga Pass Road, the elevation's about 8,700 feet. Temperatures, I went and looked, they were down, at least up in the Tahoe area, were below freezing for a couple of hours yesterday on Saturday, and that created snow. We're going to talk just briefly. I got a couple of pictures, you can see that. Anyway, as we get into today, you see temperatures already rising between 40 and 45 degrees. And then as we get into Tuesday and into, Tuesday midday, 45 to 50 degrees, building to 50 to 55 degrees, which is probably more typical temperatures for this time of year, and then holding on through to next weekend. So on Saturday afternoon, that was the 21st of June. Yes, it actually snowed. These are two pictures from Palisades, Tahoe, upper elevations. This is up at about 8,300 feet. See the Palisades actually back here. I mean, the dark whites, that is part of the existing snow base from the past winter. But all this light stuff around here, down in the grass and even around the bottom of the chairlift here, that all happened yesterday in a couple of hour period. I got one other shot. And this one here looking up at Palisades. The Palisades are up sort of behind this hill here. You can't really see it. So down here in the valley, right about down in here, that's 6,300 feet. And then you get up here, this is up at the top of Broken Arrow area and the main plateau where that other picture was taken. This is up about 8,300 feet, something like that. And the summit up here, and you can't see it behind there, is about 8,900 feet. So you can see literally the snow level at about maybe 6,500 feet, something like that. That's when you start actually seeing snow, maybe 67. And then it got a bit denser as you got high. All that said, I went and looked this morning and it's all melted out. I mean, literally it got down to up here at the top. Oh, it got down to like 30 degrees for about 3 hours. And then an hour after the front basically pushed through, it was back up to like 37 degrees, and all this melted off. By the time the sun rose this morning, it was all gone. But still, so is this a big unusual event? No, not a, yeah, it kind of is in that there was actually snow, but it's statistically significant? Is it suggestive of some change in the climate pattern? Probably not. And it wasn't just Lake Tahoe that got this snow. I mean, Mount Shasta, Mount Hood, snow came the whole way down from Canada, down the Cascades, down as far, I don't know what happened at Mammoth. I didn't even go look. It's pretty far south, but they're at 11,000 feet, so I would not be surprised if they actually got some snow as well. So, interesting little event. So what does the surf forecast look like? We're going to start up at Columbia River there, North Oregon area. Surf heights as we get into Monday, 3 feet. I mean, all this I'm just guessing is pure wind swell, and it just gets steadily smaller as we get into Friday. Then up a little bit in the 2-foot range for Sunday, a week from now. Swell heights, 3 feet at 11 seconds on Monday, 3 feet at 10 to 11 seconds on Wednesday, and then 2.5 feet at 9 seconds next weekend. For Ocean Beach, San Francisco, surf heights, 4 feet on Monday. And you're just looking at the local wind pattern, still onshore, not as bad as it was, and then fading. Winds start coming up on Thursday again. We saw that on the models. Surf heights in the 2-foot range, and maybe 4 feet on Sunday a week from now, so not a whole lot there. Let's go look at swell heights. 5 feet at 8 seconds, 4 to 5 feet at 10 to 11 seconds. Some little background southern hemi in the mix, 1 foot at 13 seconds, 1.2 feet at 14 seconds. This would be on like Thursday, Friday. Maybe a little bit more as we get into Saturday, 1.5 feet at 15 seconds. That would probably be the southern hemi swell that was generated under New Zealand a couple of days ago, and then fading out from there. Go down to Southern California, Dana Point, good catcher's mid area for southern hemi swell. Surf heights, 1.5 feet, dropping to basically nothing Wednesday, Thursday. Then finally coming up Friday in the 2.5 foot range, dribbling down from there. Wind's not really an issue. Let's see if we can tease out the swell here. Little bits of wind swell, 2 feet at 7 seconds. Then here's the southern hemi swell starting Friday morning. Let's say 1 to 1.2 feet at 16 to 17 seconds, up to 1.4 feet at 15 seconds on Friday into Saturday, then fading down from there. So a little bit of background southern hemi swell for something to ride for later in the work week into the weekend. Now, the south shore of Oahu probably is a little bit better positioned because that one gale that developed in the upper reaches of the central South Pacific was aimed directly at them. We see surf heights building to almost 4 feet, 3.5 feet somewhere on Tuesday, fading slowly down through Wednesday. There's your trade winds, 15 to 20 knots, pretty much steady through the period. Here's our swell building, 2.7 feet at 14 to 15 seconds from 188 degrees. Then that slowly trickles down till into later in the work week and then pretty much out. A little bit of background energy maybe mixed in after that. Talking 0.8 feet at 14 seconds. Yep. So pretty much a 2-day, maybe a 3-day event. Nothing huge, but certainly rideable surf. Take what you can get. We head over to South Africa, Jeffreys Bay, right there, storm after storm, just pretty much raking the coast. Surf heights up to 33 feet. Well, that's going to be a bit off the coast, tucked right in there, probably not. And you see nuking west winds at 35 knots. So that is on Monday, fading down. Winds again pegged at 30 knots as we get Thursday, Friday. Surf heights come back up to 30 feet. On Sunday, that's a week from now. Let's go take a look at actual swell sizes. I mean, that's 23 feet at 14 seconds. That's not swell. That's a raw sea state for sure. When the height of the swell exceeds the period, you know there's a bunch of wind mixed in with it. Regardless, protected breaks certainly will be seen surf. And then you see the period come up 20 seconds, and the swell size start to come up too into the 20 to 22 foot range at 13 seconds as we get into next weekend. So a nice little pattern for South Africa. And then, of course, Indonesia, the catcher's mitt for everything in the South Indian Ocean. Surf heights, 10 feet. I mean, these are probably a bit overstated, but you get the general idea, the trend at least. 10 feet on Monday, working their way down into Wednesday, coming up a bit into the 6 to 7 foot range on Thursday, then back up to 10 feet for next weekend. Winds, some version of southeast, 15 to 20 knots. Swell heights, we'll say 7 feet at 14 to 15 seconds Monday, working their way down. Another bit of background energy, 4.5 feet at 15 seconds or so. Hey, I'd love to be able to ride that background energy. And then back up into the 6 foot range at 16 seconds as we get into Saturday. So a nice swell pattern indeed. All right, time for the long-term outlook. We're going to look at the two major weather oscillations that affect the potential for storm development and therefore swell development. That is the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We'll start off talking about the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There are two phases to it, the active phase and the inactive phase. The active phase is on one side of the planet. The inactive phase typically is on the polar opposite side of the planet. They rotate opposite each other, there we go, west-east around the planet on the equator. The trade winds help reflect which phase of the MJO is moving over your portion of the planet. The active phase of the MJO is like a low-pressure system. What it does is it tends to reduce trade winds and dampens them. And by doing that, because it's a low-pressure system, takes warm, moist air at the ocean surface, helps lift it aloft. That energy then gets caught up by the jet stream, making the jet stream stronger and more supportive of trough development and gales. Conversely, the inactive phase of the MJO, it's like a high-pressure system. It cuts off the flow of moist air up into the atmosphere. It's falling air. That falling air basically feeds the standard high-pressure systems that are north and south of the equator and make trade winds stronger than normal. So, by looking at trade wind charts, we can maybe get a hint of what's going on MJO-wise. And that's what we have here. Data from the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the Pacific on the equator, used for monitoring El Nino, but we can also use them to tease out MJO things. So this is the East Pacific, West Pacific there. 0 is the equator. 180 is the international dateline. That is New Guinea there. The arrows are just 5-day average wind speeds. The longer arrow, the stronger the wind. So strong trades in this area in the East Pacific, sort of moderate to strong trades over the Central Pacific and lighter trades over the West Pacific. But it's not the trade wind speed that matters. It is the anomaly, the difference from normal for whatever is normal for this time of year in that region. So looking over here in the East Pacific, the arrows indicate trades are actually stronger than normal for this time of year. But as soon as you get past the far East Pacific, see the arrows here right on the equator pretty much collapse to almost nothing. So dead neutral normal trades across most of the East Pacific, all the Central Pacific, and maybe even a little bit west here, meaning slightly weaker trades than normal in the far West Pacific. Now, the weaker trades could be signs of the active phase of the MJO. The stronger trades more than likely are signs of the inactive phase of the MJO. But you're looking at all this, and I don't see any particular signal suggesting one or the other at the moment. Let's go look at the forecast. This is the zonal wind anomaly forecast up at the 850 millibar level. That's about 4,700 feet off the ground, but gives you a good sense of what's going on. Are the trades going to be stronger or weaker than normal? Now, this is past history here, and this is the whole planet on one chart. Oh, let's see if we can do this one little bit here. Okay, 180 is the date line. That runs right up the middle. The far West Pacific starts at 135 east, so right about there. Here's where we are today. The blues are stronger than normal trades, easterly anomalies. The yellows, westerly trades. Westerly anomalies, weaker than normal trades. So typically one can say, well, the oranges and reds are the active phase of the MJO, and the blues are the inactive phase. All right. Well, what we do see is that we've been in this regime, and starting right about yesterday, we were in this period of stronger than normal trades, the inactive phase of the MJO, likely preventing energy from reaching the jet stream, kind of stomping on storm production. But starting today and moving forward for the next 2 weeks per the GFS model here, westerly anomalies are supposed to slowly start building in the West Pacific, making it to the date line on the 27th. So what's that, 5 days from now, right? Yep. And then kind of waffling, but holding in that area, getting more solid as we get into the beginning of July, suggesting some sort of a lower pressure pattern likely taking over the West Pacific. And this easterly anomaly thing that's been going on over the dateline the entire time, that's really the hangovers from our Modoki La Nina from last winter. Finally, it looks like it's starting to get washed out of the atmosphere, and its influence is waning. Some of that might just be summer moving in too, and the building of at least weak westerly anomalies over the next 2 weeks. Let's keep digging. Next up, outgoing long wave radiation forecast. What's that mean? Well, think of it this way. If you have the active phase of the MJO and it's lifting warm, moist air aloft, that warm, moist air eventually is going to hit the upper atmosphere, condense, and start making clouds. Conversely, if you have the inactive phase of the MJO, it's high pressure, creating sinking air, and you'll have no clouds at all. So what this model attempts to do is show you, are there more clouds than normal or less clouds than normal? There's South America, Central America, Australia, New Guinea, dateline right there, 180, and the equator right there. So we're just looking pretty much in this area right here. We see no discernible MJO pattern, no rising air, no sinking air. Same thing 5 days from now, 10 days from now, 2 weeks from now, 15 days from now, maybe a weak hint of an inactive phase. Now, this is the statistic model. The dynamic model saying about the same thing, only at the 2 week mark, maybe a weak active phase showing. This is more cloud, the blue, more clouds than normal, the oranges and reds, less clouds than normal. So, if anything, an exceedingly weak MJO pattern. Phase diagrams for the same two models, statistic model here, dynamic model here. The MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The heavy dot, which is right there, is where the active phase is, so over the Indian Ocean. But if the dot is anywhere near the circle, much less being inside it, it's considered extremely weak. The forecast plots have, wherever the MJO is, exceedingly weak for the next 2 weeks. That per the statistic model. The dynamic model suggests, well, maybe the active phase of the MJO 2 weeks from now is to pop out over the maritime continent and just be weak instead of extremely weak. But either way, a weak MJO pattern seems likely for the next 2 weeks, and that is not unusual. The MJO typically is pretty weak in summer months in the northern hemisphere. This is another version of the outgoing long wave radiation chart showing potential for precipitation. The greens are moist air. That's really the active phase of the MJO. Orange and reds, the inactive phase. As one would expect, inactive phase. Oh, and there's South America, Central America, New Guinea there. 0 is the equator, the date line roughly there. So dry air over Central America, that would be the inactive phase of the MJO. Wet air over the middle of the maritime continent, that'd be the active phase of the MJO. Now, this model has been showing this steady eastward progression of the active phase for probably 2 months now, and it just seems to never happen. I mean, the MJO is just incredibly weak. This is a statistic model based on past performance. It's just guessing at what might happen. Doesn't have any real data to support it, so I don't know that I believe anything. But you can see active phase making its way across the Pacific into the early part of July, and then the inactive phase as you get into mid-July taking over. But I take that with a very, very big grain of salt. Here's the CFS model, a dynamic model going out a month, again showing you the east-west component of the winds, the blues, easterly anomalies, inactive phase, the oranges and reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase. Here's where we are today. The date line runs right up the middle here. Far west Pacific starts at 135 west or east, so right about there. You can see here is this, I was calling it inactive. This chart actually shows MJO, like that'd be an active phase, but even that is super weak, and that'd be an inactive phase, the dotted black contour. And that was back even in March and early April, and now we're even, weaker than that. But you see this easterly wind pattern, that's pretty much gone by today. It tries, according to this model, to make a little bit of a resurgence for the next week. But after that, westerly anomalies push the whole way to the date line. Then supposedly weak easterly anomalies return again in July. But you get the sense here by just looking at this, that this easterly pattern, which is really associated with the Mendoki La Nina of last winter, getting steadily weaker as these incursions of westerly anomalies get more consistent and a little bit stronger and make further westward headway or eastward headway. Exactly what we want. And then finally, the CFS model going out 3 months, past performance down here, the forecast up here, date line runs right up the middle. Again, this is east-west component of the wind, blues, easterly anomalies, consider that inactive phase. The yellows, westerly anomalies. Now, as of today, finally, it looks like we are in a pattern where easterly anomalies, at least over the western Pacific, and that's where everything really matters, are pretty much all but gone. This is a much not as detailed model as some of those others that we were just looking at, but the white here, you can't see the scale, but the white is considered completely neutral. So we're in a neutral pattern, westerly anomalies building 5 days from now, and after that, we're kind of off to the races with westerly anomalies theoretically in control. And where's that line right there? That is, wow, the whole way to the date line. As we get into even by mid-July and beyond. And look at that, westerly anomalies theoretically getting strong. I don't know if I believe any of that. Let's overlay the MJO. All right, so this model says weak inactive phase is in control right now. And you know what? That's exactly what it feels like and seems like. But by a week from now, a weak active phase is supposed to be building for a little bit. Another inactive phase, but with westerly anomalies setting up. And then our real legit active phase is forecast somewhere, mid-July and beyond. Don't know if I believe any of that. Let's overlay the low pass filter here. And this is what I was talking about before, the low pressure bias and the high pressure bias. So 90 east, that's the middle of the maritime continent. This solid black contour here, that is the low pressure bias. This is your El Nino signal. And it is just sitting right on the hairy edge of the entrance into the West Pacific. And starting July 15th, it's supposed to start moving into the Pacific in general. But even more so, the dotted contour here is your high pressure bias. That would be falling air, the downward falling portion of the Walker circulation. This, the low pressure bias, is the upward branch of the Walker circulation. But notice we went from 3 contours to 2. We're at 1 right now, and the single contour that remains is backtracking to the east and is basically going to collapse east of the date line in 2 weeks from now. And as that happens, the low pressure bias starts surging off to the east, dragging westerly anomalies with it. And then that sets us up likely as we get into the fall for what I'd call pretty much a normal fall sort of pattern. Not El Nino, not La Nina, but somewhere in between. So that sets us up for the El Nino, La Nina ENSO portion of the discussion. We're going to start by looking at subsurface ocean temperatures. That is in the Pacific Ocean, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. We're looking at data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These are the anchor lines on the buoys. The actual X's are sensors strung on those anchor lines. The sensors collect subsurface temperature water data the whole way across the equatorial Pacific. And then you use a model to fill in the gaps, and you can get a picture of where the warm and cold water relative distribution is across the equatorial Pacific. Why does that matter? Again, it's down to trade winds. If trades are blowing harder than normal, then all your warm water is going to get piled up over here in the West Pacific, and that is effectively La Nina. Likewise, if trades are weaker than normal, all this warm water starts sloshing to the east, and that is effectively El Nino. All right, so looking at the 29 degrees centigrade isotherm, it is about where it was last week. I don't think it's moved any. The 28 degree isotherm, if anything, it's lost maybe one degree, 60 nautical miles or something of distance. And the 24 degree isotherm the whole way across the Pacific, about like was last week. But again, it is not the actual temperatures. It is the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. And I am happy to report that we have, neutral to slightly warm temperatures, literally in 1 degree above normal in a continuous stream the whole way across the equatorial Pacific. So this really suggests that trades are about normal. Little pocket of cooling right there. But other than that, neither El Nino nor La Nina, as neutral as you can get. Let's go look at another chart. This chart uses the same data, but then use satellite data, and we'll look at that in a minute, to examine the height of the ocean surface and infer what's going on down in the ocean. This chart, I am happy to report, what I'm looking at is right here. This light blue filled almost this whole area here a couple of weeks ago and has steadily been declining. Notice if you're in any phase of orange or shade of orange, you're from 0 to half a degree above normal. So the thought is we are, again, just like the other chart showed, completely normal. If anything, a Kelvin wave pushing across the Pacific to at least 115 west with almost a stream of energy pushing the whole way into Ecuador. Again, encouraging in that it's showing trades are likely at normal, if not a little bit weaker than normal, and water temperatures are building and warming across the equatorial Pacific. Here's the satellite data. I know this looks kind of weird, but this is Chile, Peru, there's Central America there, the equator right here, dateline right there, New Guinea right there. This is showing, if you take the wind waves out of the ocean, the tides, the swells, is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Why does that matter? Well, if it's higher than normal, if you have warm water at depth, warm water expands and it'll create a bump on the ocean surface. You have cold water at depth, cold water contracts and you'll get a little divot on the ocean surface. So that's what this is attempting to show. Ecuador right there, pretty much, where's the scale here? 0 to -5, that's 5 centimeters below normal. So pretty much almost neutral the whole way across here. Notice there is no neutral. You're either below or you're above neutral on the scale. So 0 to above neutral here. Probably this is all some version of right at about neutral, and trying to build here off of Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. Notice there's still these lobes of really cool or what it's showing is negative sea surface temperature anomalies, likely from that, like here's California and the high pressure off here creating the nuking winds down California's coast. That's likely digging out all this here and creating these negative anomalies, and likely same thing with high pressure off of Peru and Chile doing the same thing right here. But it's only 5 degrees north and south of the equator, right about there, that matters. So it's neutral here, but with lingering atmospheric effects from La Nina threatening from the north and the south. But my guess is likely that's going to dissipate. Upper ocean heat anomalies for the past year. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Blues, colder than normal temperatures. The reds, oranges, warmer than normal temperatures. You can see here is our La Nina signal, colder than normal water in the East Pacific until about March of this year. No, I'll give it mid-March. By April, what was that, 10th, it all collapsed. Here is, you see all the warm water is here. It's sliding Now notice it's a bit tapped out, but it's sliding off to the east at like a wall building here at 135 west. California is at 120 west, but you see shades of warmer, pretty much dead neutral temperatures here east of the wall. The wall, I think, is slowly trying to creep off to the east. If nothing else, it's just setting up a warmer temperature regime over the West Pacific. That's really what we want. And there's probably that sets up westerly anomalies on top of that. And that's really what we want as we get into the fall months, because that, in my mind, is a signal of the low pressure bias moving from somewhere here off the chart, trying to ease off to the east. Sea surface temperature anomaly. Now, this is corrected sea surface temperatures, trying to account for, the temperatures would actually be much warmer. They're trying to tamp out the global warming signal, if you will. And even at that, you see everything's a lot warmer than normal. But it's just 5 degrees north and south of the equator that really matter. And the official El Nino monitoring region is from 120 west to 170 west, 5 degrees north and south. So right there. And eyeballing that, you look at, well, I see warmer than normal temperatures here over the entire West Pacific into the Central Pacific. Then you got these couple of pockets of cooling there, and you got warming all out in here. The balances area is pretty close to being neutral. Then there is an alternate way to try to calculate whether temperatures are warmer than colder than normal. Because of the global warming signal, they've said, okay, let's just average the temperatures across the entire planet. Anything that's above or below that, we'll paint it as orange or blue. Now, that is not as optimistic. It shows warmer than normal temperatures to about the date line, but then you get into this cooling regime right here, but it's neutral, warm, barely cooling, all that. And I think this area is in fact warming. The other chart shows it's warming in this area, and it seems to be warming till you get to about 150 west. And then there is a steady cool signal over here, the official El Nino monitoring region right here. So it's 50% cool, 50% neutral. So choose which chart you think is more accurate. Here is the sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. Is it getting warmer or getting cooler? And just as expected, you see from about 150 west on, it's warming, but I mean just barely slightly warming. Then you got these pockets of cooling here suggesting trades are probably stronger here. And we saw from looking at all the previous charts, the inactive phase of the MJO is likely hanging out somewhere over here. And the active phase of the MJO is probably hanging out somewhere over, or probably more over here. And then in between, you have sort of a neutral dead zone with trades not being stronger or weaker than normal, just sort of in the middle. So no wonder it is a little bit cooler here. This is just over the past 7 days. And here's the past 15 days. This chart actually shows the warming pattern a bit stronger here going to, 140 west right there. The cooling pattern about the same. In fact, pockets of warming in there. So in general, I'd say the balance of the Pacific is warming, except for the bit of cooling here. All this attributable to the inactive phase of the MJO. If the MJO were to become unstuck and start moving, my guess is this would quickly dissipate and this would quickly start warming. So we're kind of just on a holding pattern for the moment. Here's sort of the bulk average sea surface temperatures in the Nino 1.2 area. That's the area right there by Ecuador and the Galapagos. Temperatures today, expose it here, 91 thousandths of a degree below normal. I mean, not even a tenth of a degree below normal. And you see, by and large, the temperatures have been above normal. But these are these pulses of the inactive phase that have been happening here in June. So, not surprising and logical. The Nino 3.4 index, the official area out there between 120 west and 170. Temperatures today, 172 thousandths of a degree below normal. And you see, I wonder if the pulses almost correspond with what's going on here. Again, trade wind patterns, they're not all by themselves. It all sort of works in a pattern. Anyway, temperature's trying to come up, but still a little bit below normal. So neutral Neutral in this region is half a degree below to half a degree above from an El Nino, La Nina standpoint, but still biased a little bit cold, which is what the other charts tend to show. Weekly sea surface temperature anomaly values right here for the Nino 3.4 region. You just go the 11th of June, the 4th, you get it. Go week by week. We're dead neutral this week, last week neutral, down a tenth, down 2/10, you see. But basically, we have been, as I'm just looking, probably I'll say starting here since March 5th, pretty much dead neutral. Now, these are corrected values, right? I suspect temperatures are maybe 1 to 2/10 of a degree below that. But even at that, it's still neutral. What does the atmosphere think is going on? We look at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, roughly in the Indian Ocean, Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean, both on the equator, more or less. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, as one would want to see, that would be indicative of at least the active phase of the MJO, if not the development of El Nino. Then the index goes negative. Well, it's positive today, but one day does not make a trend, right? Positive 8.58 yesterday, positive 2.1, but then we were negative. You can kind of go back here over the past month. This right here looks like it was the inactive phase of the MJO in the end of May. And then since we've been in June, it looks like a dead neutral MJO pattern. 30-day average, 3.67. Where were we? We were down some in the end of May. So who knows? But all of it toggling between -4 and +4, pretty much. Kind of neutral. 90-day average falling, rising a little bit. 2.89, but where were we a month ago? 3.88. We went up to 5. So again, just all indicative of neither El Nino, neither La Nina, neither the active or inactive phase of the MJO. If anything, just biased a smidge on the side of La Nina. Here's that data graphed out. This is the 30-day average SOI from the Bureau of Meteorology. Now, this is showing it up at +10, but this is older data, too. It's about 2 days old. The reality is we're down somewhere around here. The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes, the inactive phase. And, of course, when you have stronger active phases of the MJO, you go into negative territory, and this was our last El Nino. When you have stronger upward phases, you end up in La Nina. That's where we were last winter. Now, I think the trend, if you were to draw a line through this, it would be averaging down. This is probably the inactive phase of the MJO driving it up for the moment. Sea surface temperature forecast from the CFS version 2 model for the official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 area. All right, so June, July, temperatures dead neutral. Now the model, for whatever reason, is suggesting that temperatures are to fall the threshold half a degree below normal into a La Nina pattern as we get into, I guess this would be September, October, November, and then working its way up. I mean, looking at this, I would say this is probably like a Modoki La Nina pattern because you're really only below the threshold, half a degree below normal. That's where you enter La Nina, and you have to be there for like 5 consecutive months. So this looks like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 months at best. So I'd call this Modoki La Nina. Now, this is the raw data. Corrected data says, well, not even that, just barely neutral biased cool. That is that model. But then the consensus model came out. And these are projections for June 2025. And you can see let's see if we can get it right here, right there. The statistic model says temperatures, a third of a degree below normal. The dynamic model, a tenth of a degree below normal. So here's all the dynamic models right there. You can't. So this is, I think, an older data before the model trended negative. Okay, statistic models here. Let's go plow down through this. So dynamic models, average of the dynamic models, you can go month by month, and it says minus 0.15 of a degree in basically December, let's say. The statistic models said down 0.36 of a degree in the same November, December, January. So all these would be officially neutral. You lump all that together and come out with an average that says temperature's a quarter of a degree below normal, which is effectively neutral. That said, we looked at the CFS model. Where is it? I can find it right there. And this seems like older data when, 3 weeks ago, it was saying we were going to be basically effective neutral. And all of a sudden that model has picked up on something. I don't know what it is, and said, hey, we're going to be colder than normal. So that brings up another discussion. The snow in Tahoe, the consistent strong northwest winds down the California coast, and the failure for us to move into like a real summertime pattern now, and the consistent low pressure systems moving off the northeast U.S. coast and up into towards Europe, that is all indicative of what I would probably say some sort of a lingering winter pattern. Like we haven't even officially transitioned into summer yet. Winter is still hanging on. And then we talk about the spring unpredictability barrier, right? And that by June 1st, you're supposed to move out of the spring unpredictability barrier because you've moved into quote unquote summer. Well, I don't think we're in summer. It still feels like spring by all indicators. So I don't know how much I believe the CFS model yet either, right? It might be having trouble sensing what's going on. I think all the models are struggling a little bit, though the general trend looking at sea surface temperatures seems to be pushing towards neutral still to this point in time. So if the CFS model sees something out 2 months from now that none of the rest of us can see, good on it. I'd love to hear about that. But for right now, I am not going to throw all my eggs in the CFS basket. All right, so let's get out of the trees and sort of try to get an overview look at the forest, at least for this coming week. Small southern hemiswell bound in for California, and by small, I mean inconsistent small, coming from New Zealand, trying to get around the Ross ice shelf, ice flow, ice anomaly, whatever you want to call it. So don't get your hopes up too high. Hawaii, much better position to get swell from that central South Pacific gale that was aimed directly at them. Tahiti as well. Decent swell for those locations for sure. After that, looking at the models, I'm not really seeing anything. Maybe we'll get lucky in some sort of gale that the models are showing will develop, like 4 or 5 days from now in the Southeast Pacific and push something north towards California. But we're kind of really in a funk now. The Jetstream not looking particularly good. Feels like the inactive phase of the MJO is in control right now. And if that's the case, totally explainable. Good time to go take care of business, go work, go to school, do whatever you got to do. The model's suggesting some sort of an active pattern building starting like today forward. Nothing strong, but a tendency for westerly anomalies to start pushing over the Pacific. And then that takes us to the longer term part of the discussion. Right now, all indicators suggest a improving pattern for the Pacific with the low pressure bias moving into the West Pacific, westerly anomalies pushing over the West Pacific as we get towards fall. That in turn would be feeding the jet stream, set us up for at least a normal fall swell pattern. For the rest of summer, not so sure. I think you better take what you can get. Hangover from the Modoki La Nina from last winter is still in the atmosphere, and we're trying to push that out. That's why I'm kind of harping on the westerly anomalies pushing over the West Pacific thing, is that will really mean it is good and gone, though all data pretty much at this point suggests it's gone. We just haven't moved the ball a couple of inches further over the line to get us fully out of neutral and into something that's maybe biased a little bit on the warm side. But we're counting on that, or at least hoping for it as we get into the fall. Let me know your thoughts on that. All right, so that is it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate it. Comments, questions, always welcome. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, we are done for this week. We will do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks so much for watching.